Well, thank you, Mark, for this long introduction. It seems to be that I'm quite old. um, Global trends in creative economics, green industries, education, entrepreneurship, and tourism as drivers of sustainable economic growth. I can say that's a big title. And when I thought what I could tell you, the idea was, well, this is quite a challenge. And so why not setting a title which is ecological and social transformation of the society as an engine for sustainable growth, another big title. Hopefully I can give you some input of what it is about if you want to be successful with sustainable economics. And I will give you just a hint why I'm at the Green Party. It was, I think, in 2000 when I traveled from Shanghai westbound to Wuxi. And I happened to come across the third largest sweet water lake of China, which is Taihu. And it is a beautiful lake if you drive along. And I said to my friend Ang San, stop. We want to make a photo, you know, we want to see that. So we stopped, we left the car, and immediately it came to my mind, it was smelling, heavily smelling. And after a while, I saw dead fish on the lake. And I said to my friend Ang San, what's happened with this lake? Well, he said, you know, the fast industrialization, there may be some wastewater problems we have. Actually, this lake was, I don't know what the English word was switching around. You know, it was completely destroyed at that time. So I said, Ang San, how can you do that? Because I know that we Westerners, we eat to live, and the Chinese, they live to eat. So I said, how can you dare? You know, you need the fish. And he said, oh, well, if it is not coming here from the lake, we have the infinite ocean where the fish is coming from. So don't worry, you will find enough fish in China, which was right at that time. However, when I heard this and I left Taihu, I said to myself, is it real that in this country at that time, they want to struggle, they struggle to have the same level of consumables, of cars, of refrigerators, of everything which are consumer goods than we have? It came to my mind that I had read a book of Dennis Meadows in 1972, The Limits of Growth, where simply it was said, if everything would live like we do in Germany, this world would be not enough for us. Actually, at this time, we would need 2.6 worlds, so to speak, in terms of resources, which is not only rare earth material, which is simply water, which is simply air, clean air, that we all could live. So that was actually the point where I turned around and I said, well, if I leave my management position, and I thought at that time I would do that with 60 years, I tried to work as a politician because I think we have to change this. Because one thing is for sure, we cannot say in the Western world, we want to have our cars, we want to have this level of civilization, and the people in Myanmar or in China or elsewhere, they should stay as they are in terms of not using the resources like we do that. By the way, I remember when we were talking about that, and I looked at all the bicycles in China, and I asked you a question: can you really imagine that all the people who are riding bicycles right now would have a car? My friend just looked at me, and he said, "And how many cars do you have?" And I said, "Well, I have a car, my wife has a car, my son has a car, and my daughter has a car." And he didn't have to say anything more. By the way, if you go to Beijing right now, you will find the problems if everybody wants to have a car. So this is, so to speak, the point where I wanted to start with, that we really have a severe problem in this world. We have overfishing. We have the situation that the agricultural soil is at 40% is overexploited. We have social problems. We have 20% of the population in the world has 85% of, or has of the 85% of the world's GDP. And so we need to do something. That was the reason Mark mentioned that I joined the committee for wealth, for growth, wealth, and quality of life. But if you look at that, you can make a choice. You can say, okay, we want to have degrowth. And immediately what everybody tells me, if we would have degrowth, that would mean that you have to sell your car, you should have a smaller flat screen, etc., etc. On the other hand, is it real that if we think of prosperity, for instance, in Germany, we have 1.8 or 2% growth of GDP, that we need this kind of a growth to increase our wealth and quality of life? What does it mean, for instance? If we want to increase that, at the moment, at an average, a household in Germany buys every 4 years a new flat screen. If you extrapolate this in future, that would mean that we would need a flat screen every 2 years in 2020. Do you really believe that our wealth, our prosperity, our quality of life increases by cutting the number where we buy a new flat screen from 4 to 2 years? I don't believe that. But if we would have a situation where I could swim in the River Rhine, which I used to do when he said I grew up in Bonn, and when I was 6 years old, I used to swim in the River Rhine. Try it today. I think nobody of you would really like that. It smells, and you really could hurt. All right, this is the introduction, so to speak. And the alternative to degrowth actually is, can we have a certain growth which would not lead to a situation where we would eat up more than we have, where we would use more resources than we have, but we would try to match with the resources of this world? And I give you another example. In the Committee of Growth, Wealth, and Quality of Life, we had been 18 experts, 18 parliamentarians, and we invited experts from the industry. So we invited the head of the industry of the chemical industry in Germany, which is very successful, as you might know. Companies like BASF, like Bayer, like Boehringer Ingelheim are very, very successful in Germany. And it was really amazing when this person said, well, the reason why we are so successful is because of the environmental laws which we had in the 70s. And by the way, in the social framework as well. So, and I remember that in the 70s, when politicians said, we want you to clean out your wastewater. We don't want you to use any more chloride or chlorides, or we want you not to dump your wastewater just in the River Rhine or elsewhere. Everybody was crying, it's too expensive. We are getting out of being competitive. Even today, you hear that very frequently. But amazingly, this person told us, because of the strict rules in the 17th, we are now so successful in what we are doing right now. So I think there are a lot of other examples of that. This morning, I visited a small company here close to Berlin, Berolina. I guess nobody would know what they are doing. What are they doing? They are replacing the cartridges of printers, laser printers. And I thought they are all made in Taiwan or in China or elsewhere. No, they are competitive here in Berlin with our wages, with our environmental laws, and this company specifically calls themselves a sustainable company. They have 30% of their usage they create by themselves by photovoltaics on their roof. The heating is done by photovoltaics. They have a kind of a cradle to cradle, if you know what I mean. This is a scheme where you replace and have cycles more than using up consumables. So they are very successful with a green kind of in this field. I mean, if you know cartridge, you go in a shop and say, what is the price? You don't ask. Unfortunately, you don't ask, how long will that last? How many prints you will have out of one cartridge? But they're very successful in the B2B business because there the people do count. Do they need to replace their cartridge once in a year or second or 3 times in a year? So I could give you a number of other examples where sustainability is the basis of success more than trying a cost factor. And the same is true for what we call the social environment. Mark mentioned that I worked 25 years for SCHOTT. SCHOTT is a company, actually, which has no private ownership. It belongs to the Carl Zeiss Foundation. There's no private ownership. Nobody is taking money out of that. It's not a public company. Well, SCHOTT itself is a public company, but the ownership is a non-personal foundation. And we had a system where we had higher pensions, which I will enjoy in a couple of years, higher pension plans than everybody of you possibly. And so what we have done, we said we want to have a sustainable kind of framework in terms of social responsibility. And we had been very successful. Carl Zeiss, as you may know, is a very successful company. And if you have an oven top of Ceran, everything is made by SCHOTT. So I could give you a number of examples. The only point is, and this is very important, and that's the first lesson to learn, you will not have a 3 years return of investment. So it's nothing for the guys who want to buy and sell. Buy a company, revolve it, and sell it after 2 years and making a lot of money. Because I think we all, if we work, we want to have a kind of a lifetime work, more than just for 2 years. So the message is you can be very successful by doing this. And if you would try to elaborate that now in some specific fields, and I will mention one of them. I lived 2 years in Japan, and Japan suffers and suffered at that time and still suffers of what we may call deflation. They had a huge crisis like we had here in Europe 4 years ago, and which is still kind of existing, but more than 20 years ago, we had a banking crisis in Japan, and following by that, a kind of a deflation. From my perspective, Fukushima is not only a disaster in terms of that a nuclear power plant exploded by the tsunami, but it is a big chance for this country. And unfortunately, the Japanese government decided not to go this way. But I think if you see how many employment could be created, how many actually, chances would be created by shifting from one technology, the old nuclear technology, into sustainable, like renewables. It is a tremendous chance for this country to go this way. Japan is doing what they want. I'm chairman of the ASEAN countries, the Parliamentarian Friendship Group of the ASEAN countries. ASEAN countries are from Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, up to Myanmar. And whenever, when I talk to the parliamentarians, one of their biggest concern is how can they create enough energy production for their countries, enabling then industrial growth in their countries. So energy is a very important factor. And Vietnam is now negotiating with France, with Japan, with China about building up nuclear power plants. But what does it mean? That means that the state organizes that, big companies would organize that, but I doubt whether this will come down to the level of the single citizen. They would have a chance, which is decentralized energy production, which is less in terms of cost. I don't know whether you know that the lowest cost for producing energy right now is wind energy. Cost is 7.5 cents per kilowatt, followed by photovoltaics, 8 cents per kilowatt. And then we have nuclear power, 11.6 cents. The last figure is very simple. The United Kingdom is in a stage where they consider another power plant, a nuclear power plant. So there is an official offer of EDF, that's the French nuclear kind of state-owned company, and they are offering 11.6 plus a guarantee, which they want to have, a guarantee that the price would increase of 1 kilowatt together with the inflation. And as you know, if you once have erected a windmill or you have your photovoltaic cell on your roof, the costs are gone because the investment cost. We say that the sun and the wind will not write any bills. So what I'm saying is there would be a chance if a decentralized development of countries would take place. And in this circumstances, the second message I want to say or give is, unfortunately, this would mean that one of the most severe problems in the developing countries would need to be overcome. This is corruption. Corruption is really a problem in all these countries. And I do say that so frank and in an undiplomatic way, because it's the most severe problem in these countries that they would not develop sustainable technologies. Like, as I said, decentralized energy, and I could add then the way how they would develop their own agriculture, how they would develop their production beside of energy production. Everybody tells us that the situation or the reason why Germany is so successful, the reason is because 65% of our employees are not in multinational companies. They are in what we call small and medium-sized entities, the Mittelstand, the famous Mittelstand. But the basis of the Mittelstand is he needs a non-corrupt situation, because it's impossible. I mean, for a Siemens, or I shouldn't talk about any companies, but for a big company, they can give some money to someone to try to influence decisions, buying decisions. For a small, medium-sized, I worked there for a company, we made some 150 million euros in sales and turnover. I could not go to the president of Indonesia and give him any money and saying, please help me that I can make some more business here in Indonesia. Impossible. I had to work by myself, but if corruption would be there, I would have a problem. So this is the second message I want to give. Third message. If a company, a country wants to develop, one of the most hindering factors are that you do not have educated people. Education is one of the most important things to do. And I'm always a bit astonished if they want to copy the German system of our dual education, which is half you go to school and the other half you are working in a company. Because this is based on a more than 100 years development of what we call craftsmanship in Germany. Nevertheless, I think education, vocational training is one of the key if you want to develop these countries. And this is mostly not understood, this is very important in terms of not only social responsibility, but to develop a country. So if you want to develop, want to have a sustainable development, education is one of the most important items you have to look for. Last thing I want to say, and fourth, which is very important, is you have to measure success. If you today listen, Mr. Gabriel, our Minister of Economics and Energy, he's going in his press releases and say, oh, Germany is doing very well. We have 1.8% GDP growth. And next year we will have 2%, and next year we will have 2%. What that does not tell you is quality of life, is the wealth of everybody, is it increasing? So if you have the economic dimension, which is important, you need to look for what we call the social dimension and the ecological, the environmental dimension as well. For the time being, for today, unfortunately, by using more coal for energy production, actually the ecological footprint of Germany is going down. So we are increasing the footprint. That is, we use at the moment more resources. We are increasing the carbon dioxide production at the moment by producing energy. We are eating up even more of the world than we did before. So I would not stand here as a Minister of Economics and said we are successful. Fortunately, and the other dimension is a social dimension, which is normally the unemployment rate, or could be the Gini factor. If you know what that means, that it is the Gini factor describes actually the spread of income and wealth of an economy. Actually, this stopped at 2005, so we are in a rather good situation. But concerning the ecological footprint, actually, things are getting worse. And I think this is very necessary that you start to think not you want to increase growth. By the way, you increase growth by having more accidents in a society, but to look for the real measurable social dimension and ecological dimension. I think this is very important. By doing that, you need to have, as I said, a long-term breath. You will not get a return of investment within 3 years. Again, this would be not necessary. I come back to what to my visit this morning at the Berolina. I asked this question, and they said we had a huge program to reduce our energy. For instance, we have shifted from this kind of light to LEDs, which use 10% of the power which these lights use, but you have a return of investment which is 6 years. You will not find a better return for a lot of programs you need. By the way, if you buy, or if you build your house or you build a factory, you would not think in 3 years terms. You would think in 30 years terms or even longer. So I think it is definitely not hindering, but it is supporting. It is supporting good profits on a long term if you have this long-term perspective. To end up, I would give the message, and we, as a member of the Green Party, we have this saying, with green ideas to write black figures. And the key message I want then to summarize that is, when people say we cannot afford sustainable production, we cannot afford this social dimension, we are just looking for the wage of our employees, and if we would increase that by X, we would get out of production. We would not produce anything here in this country if this would be true, because the level of our wages, the level of our income is definitely higher than in many other countries. So just by looking at this situation, you would say, no, that can't be true. And the level, by the way, of our environmental, say, regime is far higher than in many other countries. Again, I'm saying, and this is the basis of the success of the German Mittelstand or the German society right now. So why not copy that? So this is the key message I would give. Don't be afraid of, say, the Greens. Don't be afraid of green technologies. Actually, if you look into details, you will find out that actually the sustainable thinking is a basis of success and not hindering success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gambke, and I wish that more thought the way you did. I think very often we think of the environment and we think of these sustainable solutions and it's always going to be more expensive, it'll cost more, it'll decrease profits. But I think very often it is the opposite. So I think we need to really change our mentalities as well as our lifestyles when it comes to that. So thank you very much for that excellent lecture. And we'd be very happy to welcome your comments and your questions. So if you could raise your hand if you'd like. We have a first row here. And as always, if you could briefly introduce yourself so that Dr. Gambke knows who you are.
Hello, I'm Tamas, and I'm working here at the ICT as an intern. And my question is, what programs does Germany, or even your party, offer for small, mid, or big companies to promote, to change to a sustainable green economy?
Well, actually, our party is a political party, so we cannot offer kind of a programs. What we can do is, if we would have an access to government, which we don't have because we are not part of the government, we could support. But I give you a very, very concrete example. One is education. There's a private school, which is called Ecological, being located in Regensburg. And what they did is, they said, the most important thing is to educate people in other countries and not at universities. This is another program, but academic, say, education is kind of a thing which everybody is aware of. But what they offered, and now they have just they have entered the second round, so to speak, with people from Malaysia who are doing 18 months education here in Germany. And what they will get after these 18 months is a degree as a Master of Industry, Industriemeister in German, which is a degree which is officially then by the I don't know what Handwerkskammer is, the Chamber of Commerce, Industrie- und Handelskammer, Chamber of Commerce. After 18 months, they just had sent back 14 people or 18 people to Malaysia. And they have the level of the craftsmanship which an equivalent German would have. So what they can then do, they can train people in their country. I think these programs start very small, but I think we could do far more in terms of bringing the people here, and the point I want to make is not at the academic level, and not at, say, not at the academic level, but the level below, which is the most important thing to do. Give you, okay, this could be done. Secondly, in terms of environmental things, I think we simply have to look for more the specific programs in these countries. I give you an example. We had a rice farming cooperative in Thailand. And it happened that the link to Germany was that it was headed, or is headed, by a gentleman who had been working 10 years in Bremen as actually an engineer for aeroplanes. He returned to Thailand and said, what can I do? And he left aeroplanes and went to rice farming. And he had a simple idea. He said, okay, coming from Germany, coming from Europe, Germany is very keen on ecological and food. So he shifted this cooperative of, in the meantime, more than 5,000 farmers, not families, family members, maybe 1,000 farmers or 800 farmers, to a kind of a green farming. And by doing that, he was more successful, he gets more money. One simple thing is, what we had to do is, we gave him the money for a storage building. So one of the problems actually was that the rice they harvested, if you sell that immediately, you have to sell it at the lowest price. So what I'm saying is, little programs help, but they should be more numerous. What does not help, to my understanding, would be to look for the big multinational entities. They have their programs by themselves. From my perspective, they don't need any support. But if you look at what we are doing, we are sometimes more listening to the big ones because they are speaking louder, they have more power, than to the small ones.
Additional questions or comments? Okay, let's move more towards the back.
Hello, my name is Tamiloy, and I'm also an intern here and a student in Berlin. And I wanted a comment maybe from you, because today I think we can't distinguish between economy and financial markets anymore. And as we were talking a lot about the long-term revenue that you can gain from sustainable economy, I just wondered if it's still possible in our times of financial markets who are looking for short-term revenue to really establish something like this on a national level or on a EU level or on a global level. So I would like to have your comment on this challenge and how we can maybe face it. Thank you.
Very good question, because absolutely right. The pressure from today's structure of financial markets are on short-term revenues, short-term returns. So one of the key issues, absolutely right, would be to reconstruct actually financial markets, to try to keep them away from making the quick dollar than for long-term investments. And there are a lot of specific little items to change. One would be to increase the leverage ratio, which is at the moment in Germany at Basel III is negotiated at 3%. Absolutely ridiculous. I just wrote a parliamentarian proposal of increasing that to 10%. By the way, the Americans, they agree with that. What does it mean? Equity means that the responsibility for longer term investments are increased. What we do, another little thing, is to increase equity or to allow equity increasing in small and mid-sized companies. Very complicated now. I would come into very details of how to reconstruct that. But there are means to do so. To simply say the derivatives, is it derivatives? Yeah. We should control them. What do they really include? The FTT, the financial transaction tax, would be another thing. If you have a tax, like you have an added value tax on any goods, my perspective is you should have an added value tax, so to speak. You could argue whether there's an added value. But you had an added value tax on financial transactions as well, which is definitely not 90%, but far lower than 1%, but would be enough. Because the high frequency of the financial market would be a bit slowed down. So there are a lot of things. The specific question you did, we need to have a reconstruction of our financial markets in order to allow more sustainable in the, production area of entities, yes.
Back.
Thank you, sir, for your interesting presentation. My name is Brice. I'm French. I'm also an intern at the ICD. I would like to go back a little bit on the education issues you were talking about. Nowadays, always more people are living in big city. And well, there's a lot of local initiative coming always from civil society with like urban agriculture, with composting and reusing it for agriculture and so on. Do you think, have you ever think, or I don't know, about concrete technique and strategy to lead people to appropriate themselves this kind of sustainable way of living in city, such as recycling more and always more? Because like if I just compare France and Germany are recycling so much more than us. I don't think it's just a cultural aspect. There's also a question of education, as you said. So is there any strategy or technique you have to educate people to the sustainable behavior? Thank you.
Well, I think the most important thing actually is I'm not so familiar with France, unfortunately, although it is very close to us, but I'm very familiar, as I said, with Asian countries. And for instance, I lived in Singapore for 4 years. I think it is a kind of an education. It's simply, I guess even here, but if I would make if I would ask the people on the street, is it expensive, is environmental and education, or to educate people, is it kind of a cost factor? Everybody would say, yes, it's a cost factor. And I try to make, like what we have here. We have this 3 years education at the level of people who, I don't know the English word, the Gesellenprüfung, who after 3 years would be a craftsman. Yeah. If you look for the cost, everybody would say, oh, it's too costly. If I talk to my friends in Indonesia, and I just afterwards I meet Mr. Habibie, the son of the former president, we will talk about that, and he will try to convince me it's too expensive. Nobody would invest into 3 years education for a person. After the 3 years, he may even go to the competitor. But the situation is everyone wants to copy German. I think, to put it in one nutshell, we need to inform people about the sustainable, say, the result, the positive result of sustainable doings. I can explain that in a very, very detailed, in very many items, and I think the best thing is what we can do is to say, look to Germany. If you want to copy that, just be as we are. And I think this is a very convincing fact. By the way, that's the reason why a lot of people like me are nowadays traveling around in Germany and trying to push what we call Energiewende, the change of the energy consumption, because everybody is looking in the world is looking at us. And they say, okay, it's funny that to live with wind and sun, and all the volatile kind of an energy production. But if they can do that as a highly industrialized country, I think everybody would follow us. So I think simply the answer is look for the good examples and follow them. Yeah. Any more questions?
Final question in the front, please.
Hello, Dr. Gambke. Thank you for your speech. I have such question. I made a conclusion from this conference that to be creative, actually, if you need to be competitive, you must be creative.
Yes.
But in a very competitive environment, we have winners and we have losers. And can we expect that in such global competitive environment, we can have social sustainability?
That's a very good question, because I think there's I wouldn't say a conflict, but it is kind of a problem like we have it, especially in Germany, that actually, as you said, if you are taking the risk of starting something new, you have always not only the risk means you can win, but you can lose. And what does it mean to lose is no income, possibly, loss of the money you have spent. And this is kind of a part of, I think, German society where we, and actually I say it very, very loudly, I have not a good answer on, is how can we increase the, say, acceptance of a situation where there might be winners, but there might be, let me say it very frank, losers as well. And what kind of network, social network, and that comes to your question, we need to say, okay, if somebody who would be on the loser side because his creative idea didn't work out, what could we do? And I think, thing where we Germans would think, okay, we have to guarantee a certain minimum income. We are very close then to talk about Hartz IV and others. Where I think the most important thing is to say, oh, he has done something very good because he took the risk, although he lost. And this is a kind of acknowledgement of people who took the risk, which, as he mentioned, I lived in San Diego for quite a while, and I know America very well, where they are definitely ahead of us in terms of if somebody says, okay, I'm risking $50,000 and unfortunately I failed, nobody would blame him. And they would even give him, say, oh, he's kind of creative, you know, and he even would get more for the next, definitely the people would look rather thoroughly what he would try to make with the money if you would get it, if you would give it to him. But I think they say risk means that we can win and that we can lose, and we wouldn't blame him for that. And this kind of thinking is not really developed in this country. We say, okay, if somebody loses, the only question is how much money we give him, what was the Hartz IV level, so to speak, we want to spend for him. And that's not the right one. I would say, did he learn his lesson? So I can give him the next 50,000 Deutschmarks because he now knows what he did wrongly, so to speak, and the next one he will be successful. But this is not the thinking we have in this country. And I say that as an entrepreneur, I created my own business, and it was really, really difficult to get the money for that. But we have made our second million right now.